Hey, friends. Thanks for joining us for another experts panel, Node.js experts panel here. Folks from Node Core and application architects and developers. Happy to hang out and chat with you all. Just some housekeeping. Thanks to everybody who's already presented. John Walley and Upcar Leiter and I guess myself. It's been a great day. I hope y'all checked out the NearForm event yesterday that this is a part of. All of this is or will be available on replay as well. So check out developer.ibm.com/conferences/ the NearForm event URL, which we'll post later. Feel free to ask questions in the chat of the video here. Or if you want to, I posted a tweet on my profile that you can ask questions, in that thread, or feel free to DM me. My DMs are open. My Twitter handle is right there. You can probably see it. Am I actually pointing to it? Oh, that's pretty good. Boink.
Not bad.
I've been getting better at that. So, in lieu of questions, I've got all sorts of things that I want to ask folks. But before we get into that kind of part of the conversation, we can maybe go around the room and do some introductions. Since you are first on my screen, Anton, I'll go to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. So Anton Whalley, I'm an IBM application architect, working with our partners, helping them build things with Node. Been involved with Node for a long time now. Actually, originally started out with NearForm, way back in the day. Helped set up NodeConf EU as it is now, Node Dublin as it was then. And been doing bits and pieces around, looking at diagnostics and that type of thing. So that's me.
How did I not know that you were at NearForm? That's really interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. And the role that I'm in now was partially, when James Snell left IBM, I joined the team that he was on, and he went to NearForm. So it's a small world. Anyway, going around the horn here, Beth, you're next up on my screen. You want to intro?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Griggs. I'm a senior software engineer at Red Hat. I moved over from IBM about 9-10 months ago now. And since I joined IBM, I was working in the Node.js runtime team. So that means my role was kind of split between contributing to the Node project, where I'm a Node TSC member, also on the release working group, so very much involved with making sure the releases of Node get out on time and the new major releases and all of that kind of work. And when I'm not doing Node community, Node core kind of stuff, I'm also looking for like deployment tooling, some bits of advocacy work and that kind of thing.
That's great. Yeah, the release work too. I appreciate all that you do there. Thank you. Cool. Carlos?
Hello. I'm Carlos with IBM. I'm a cloud native architect, and I work on the go-to-market team, helping clients lately deploy OpenShift with our software, and looking at DevOps, CI/CD, supply chain aspects of it, and also runtimes like serverless. So I try to help the engineering teams and the DevOps team get the applications to production.
Cool. Yeah, maybe we'll dig into that supply chain stuff too later on. We'll talk more about that. Cool. Michael.
I'm Michael Dawson. I'm the Node.js lead for Red Hat and IBM. That means I get to spend a good amount of my time working in the community. So along with Beth and some of our other team members, I'm on the technical steering committee, involved in a bunch of the different working groups and just sort of help Node move forward as a project. The other thing is I get to work with the teams within Red Hat and IBM. So, people like Joe, but also Carlos and Anton are other people that we, for example, in our reference architecture effort, I try and bring together all the expertise we have across the companies and leverage that for, our customers and other people who are using Node.js. And so it's just great that I get to work with people from all across the different areas.
Yeah, it is great. I feel fortunate to be able to do this work at IBM and with you and Beth, Michael and Beth at Red Hat, doing a lot of work in the community and open governance stuff. I guess I'll intro myself as well. Joe Sepi here. I work for IBM, open source engineer and advocate. Do a bunch of work in the Node space, but also am chair of the Cross Project Council at the OpenJS Foundation, and help with like kind of governance stuff and just generally trying to make the foundation a good place for all the projects that are there. Lots of great work to do there. So, and if you're interested, it's all open for folks to get involved. We got lots of stuff we want to be doing. So feel free to reach out or join the meetings and stuff like that. I thought it might be interesting to start by just kind of talking about, what month is it? Just a month or two ago, 16 came out. And I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about like some of the features and things that we think are, I don't know if exciting is the right word, but what do we like about what's going on in Node these days? Michael, I'll start with you first.
So one of the things which actually was still experimental in 16, but I recently landed the PR to make it stable, was the async local storage. That one I thought, was quite interesting in that things like the diagnostics, observability are always key things for people when they get to larger scale deployments. So seeing us to continue to make progress on those kinds of things, like the sort of fundamental pieces of the runtime that will help support the observability, that was certainly a highlight for me.
What's give me an example of how that's useful, the async local storage stuff.
Right. So for example, like, when you're running a large application, you're actually going to have a whole bunch of different microservices working together. And that actually gets complex to figure out, when the initial request came in and it's gone through 10 different microservices to get the answer back out to the person who's made the request. Well, when something goes wrong, how are you going to figure out where things are going? So things like tooling like OpenTelemetry is a project under the CNCF, which is being used across different languages to be able to help you stitch together a trace of the transaction as it went through all those different microservices. What it needs under the covers, though, is it needs to be able to maintain, like, when the request comes into the runtime, and when the runtime makes requests, so, for example, you get an HTTP request in, and that request needs to get some data from the database, for example, or to another microservice, you need to maintain the connection between that incoming HTTP request and the outgoing request to the database, to the other microservice. And so within Node, like within languages, other languages which are more threaded oriented, like C or Java, there's always been the concept of a thread local. And basically you can just stash some information in the current thread. And because you're using a single thread, you can just pull that out to make that association. Node's always been very asynchronous oriented, and you've got one thread actually serving a whole bunch of concurrent asynchronous flows. And so you don't get that. There's been user space modules to help you maintain that that context, but it's been a challenge for them to sort of keep up. They rely on it possibly on Node internals. And also, you get cases where you need packages to help out by maintaining context if they're doing things like pooling or anything like that. And pointing them to a third-party package isn't nearly as good as saying, hey, there's built-in functionality in Node Core to be able to do this. You really should support it. So pulling in this functionality into the into Node Core itself as the async local storage, is a great step towards moving the sort of ecosystem forward in terms of being able to well support that tracing connection between the incoming and outgoing requests.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Carlos, I saw you nodding. You have some experience with this sort of stuff too?
Yeah, I nod because in a lot of folks that work in other languages, they don't suffer the pain, right? So they get but they are suffering the single thread and working with code that looks synchronous. But the community and apps have been shipping with tracing, which is a big part of cloud native, of understanding when you break a monolith into different microservices. A lot of people think about it's just breaking a big jar, but in Node.js, maybe breaking the methods of the HTTP request, breaking the resources. So if you don't know, you can create monolith in Node.js. People think because you're creating a Node.js, you cannot create a monolith. You can create like a very, very, very large Node.js app that consumes gigs of memory, and it's your bottleneck on CPU. But yeah, Michael was saying it's there's different frameworks, different practices, but it comes down and build to manage, where the developers are getting used to their applications being deployed to the cloud versus like working locally, right? Or they're used to program locally with an IDE. But when your application is broken into multiple microservices, and when I say microservices, it's like basically different web servers that they talk to each other, but they build a transaction. So when the user wants to retrieve money from one bank account to another bank account, is a series always listening. Is one transaction. So in other languages, maybe languages before like Node.js existed. By the way, Node.js is 12 years. People realize that? We've been talking about Node.js for 12 years. So it means that's when people ask like, what's the latest, hottest thing in Node.js? I get like, hopefully nothing, because I want my apps to keep working. Maybe it gets faster, but there's no new APIs or breaking APIs. So people are asking for the new stuff, like if it's performance, stability, things like this, tracing, observability around metrics is something that the Node.js community always have to figure it out. So things that are embedded into the runtime, everybody benefits because it's tested their commonality, and it's one way of doing things instead of like fighting over like semicolons or tab versus spaces, right? It's just there and just use it. So I'll stop there and we can continue the conversation around.
I think there's a good segue there too, Beth. And I saw you on mute a minute ago, so I'm curious what you know what you wanted to share. But also, I think it's a good segue too into like releases and stability and enterprise adoption and things like that. So maybe you could chime in.
Sure. So picking up on what Carlos said about keeping releases boring, that is actually part of the intent of our working group. And particularly, it may be surprised at like major releases. Major releases are the things that are breaking. So that's what you will see mainly going out in the 16.0.0 release. And that means like all of the new features, all of the interesting things to get your hands on, they've probably already been shipped in like the previous, like the 15 release. Because the way our release process works is we have a current release line, and every 2 weeks we bundle everything that lands and ship it out. Everything that's not breaking, if there's breaking, that would need to wait until the next major release. But that does mean when it comes to the next major release, all you will tend to see in the changelog is the breaking changes. And we purposely try to make those as boring as possible with the intent that they should be avoided where possible. We don't want to break people. Where we break people, we want to make it easy for them to know how to work around that breakage, how they can upgrade to the later versions. So I think that's something I'd like to call out. Like the new major release isn't actually where you get all the new features. It will be all of the breaking changes that have queued up and been shipped out. But on the other hand, it does mean with the current release line, if you're following that, every 2 weeks you will get your hands on the new features. The one kind of exception is it's normally the V8 updates that get gated into the major release. And they're always somewhat exciting because that's how we get our hands on those new JavaScript features. And in particular, Node 16 will be slightly more exciting than Node 15 because that's our long-term supported release line. So in October, Node 16 will be elevated to long-term support. And you'll find a lot, particularly in enterprise, that people stick to the long-term support versions. So the folks who are currently on Node 14, they will have quite a lot of new features coming their way when they start upgrading to Node 16 in around October time when it's promoted to long-term support.
Yeah, Michael and I had a good laugh on. I brought him onto another podcast, live stream thing, and we were joking like, "Oh, Node 16's coming out, breaking news, exclusive here," and obviously it's a really scheduled, predictable thing. And then we joked like, "Oh, all these exciting changes," but the nice thing is that it's not exciting in that we're not breaking things. So, maybe Beth, you could share for a moment like what's this is a feature that enterprises can rely on. What does that sort of look like in terms of releases, and how does Node work there?
Yeah, so yeah, the long-term support policy definitely was built with the enterprise in mind. Predictability is key. We want people to have predictable schedules so they can follow accordingly. And so our policy at the moment states that there's 2 major releases per year. The even numbered ones get promoted or elevated to long-term support, and those ones will get support for a much longer period of time, talking around 30 months of long-term support. And then we have like a trickle flow of how features land into the various release lines. Current is kind of our cutting edge release line. And that's the one where you get a new update every couple of weeks or so and you pick up all the new features. And then what our group does, the release working group, is we audit each of these new features for their stability, whether they're likely to introduce any kind of like problematic behavior, cause any or risk any breakages. And then we audit all of the new features and then decide, yes, we think this feature is stable enough to be brought back into one of the long-term support release lines. So we really do like start to end in the release working group, the whole flow and the whole process of getting features out is with the stability in mind, predictability in mind, especially considering our enterprise users that may not be able to adapt to kind of like the cutting edge schedule with others.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, Anton, while we're talking about like enterprise adoption, I'm curious, what do you see when enterprises, companies are considering Node.js? What are their concerns that they typically got to work through with them?
Yeah, I think and Michael sort of touched on it there with the features around observability, etc., that we're starting to build in, but definitely the operational aspects of it. So the developers are getting a lot of success with Node, sort of building it on their desktop and sort of getting up and running, developing quite quickly. But how do you run that enough from an operational perspective? Sometimes there's challenges in there, and we're seeing different reactions to that. So I think as an industry, and Carlos mentioned it there earlier on, we're seeing sort of a shift towards serverless, and that has a huge impact on sort of how operations run. We're seeing adoption of Knative. We've got Code Engine, IBM Cloud, Google Cloud Run, and DigitalOcean even have an app system based on Knative technology as well, and that's what we're seeing sort of a shift towards in terms of operations. So making it as invisible, making the management of the runtime as invisible as possible for the operation folks, and then providing probes and views out that are consistent across Python, Java, Node, and all those types of environments as well. And we're like, as a technology community, we are doing a hell of a lot of work there, but a lot of the other runtimes are doing the work there as well. And it's around the consensus that we've got with the likes of OpenTelemetry and CNCF and those types of initiatives, and sort of that foundational model works really, really well. And it's great to see as an industry we're adopting it more. Obviously, the work that you're doing in OpenJS, but more and more collaboration and an ecosystem approach to technology is just fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's like our customers, again, that's what differentiates us, but that's what our like customers and partners are looking for, is like that open collaborative model. Yeah,
and I'll maybe come back to this, but I think you raise a good point that I'll go to Michael on as well. But like the concept of like foundations, and I mean that in terms of like Linux Foundation, CNCF, OpenJS. There's a lot of benefit there that I think sometimes people don't realize that they may be relying on. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the importance of foundations and this sort of open source work, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like if I'm operating some business critical pieces and I'm relying on open source, I don't want to just choose any open source, right? And I think that's where foundations can help to set the right environment, so that the open source projects are a cooperative kind of environment where you get out what you put in. And if I'm operating my business and I'm depending on some key open source projects, I want to be able to contribute and participate in those. So if something goes wrong, I'll have the ability to have some of the people who are working in the team get in there, propose fixes, get them landed. And so therefore, we want to have projects that are sort of, that open source, where they're looking to let people come in, the direction is not, you know, set by one company and their agenda, but by, you know, the sort of the needs of the overall community, and so that, you know, if you want to get involved, you can get involved and you can help out. And I think the foundation, so for example, the OpenJS Foundation, which has taken, you know, some of the patterns from the Node.js project, is a good example of supporting that kind of approach where, you know, it's meant to be open. There's things to say, well, you know, the technical steering committee isn't going to be 90% from one company. It's going to have a nice mix. You know, we support individuals and organizations of all sizes sort of getting involved and helping to move things forward.
Yeah. Michael and I and Beth did a talk at the OpenJS World event just a few weeks ago about open source. So if you want to learn some more about that, you can spend some time there. But I'll maybe go to you, Beth, to just you know, kind of reiterate a little bit of what we talked about there. But what do you see like the pros and cons of open source, the positive aspects, and I know sometimes there are challenges as well.
Yeah, so some of the key positives is like collaboration among the projects, particularly in the OpenJS Foundation. I know recently we've done a lot of work to try and get projects talking to each other, sharing their same issues. For example, infrastructure. We all have infrastructure to maintain for builds. It'd be great if all the projects can, you know, get together, discuss best practices, and share some of that effort between them. And also the open source, meaning that everyone has a level playing field, everyone can come in and contribute. It means it's a great, healthy environment for anyone looking to start participating in open source. On the other hand, people have to know that each project is set up in that way to and encourages new contributors. So it's very difficult, particularly in no-code, to come in as a brand new contributor, look at the code and find something to contribute. That's very hard. I struggle with it. So that's one of the key challenges. And we are doing some work within OpenJS to try and alleviate kind of that barrier to entry, lower it so more folks can get involved and feel empowered to get involved with the projects. In particular, there was a mentorship scheme set up where they kind of pair an experienced contributor with someone else to try and onboard them into the project. And even within the release working group, we did set up some sessions where every couple of weeks in the calendar, I'd book an hour's slot, invite anyone to join and just watch the process of creating a Node.js release. So if anyone wanted to get involved with release, they had someone who they could ask questions, they could shadow, because it's not really, with the whole auditing stability, it's not the kind of process where you can just read a doc and then get on with it. There is a bit of experience that comes with time, with looking at the type of PR that lands. Is this risky? Could this break someone? Oh, I've seen a PR like this break a module before. We should be a bit more cautious. So that's really a lot of the learning that couldn't really come across in a doc. So we had to have these mentorship sessions where folks could actually shadow and get involved with when we're making those decisions. And that worked really well. So I think we onboarded about 3 new releases from those sessions. So it was a good way of getting some more help within the release working group, onboarding some more folks. And it even benefited the group much further than that, with the new contributors coming in, helping to build automation, helping to identify any gaps in our process or docs that if they had to ask about it, it means that we need to put more effort into automation or docs. So overall, it's a win-win for both the new contributors, the project, and the working group.
Yeah, that's there. You touched on a number of things there. I will give some props to the mentorship team, who have done a really great job in kind of getting a system going, and they've always got people who are, you know, wanting to get involved. So that's really great, and they're working with a variety of groups within the Node.js space to onboard some new mentees, pair them up with mentors. But you know, I'll concur too. Like, Node.js can be a little bit hard to get involved in with, because, you know, there's a bit of a learning curve, and you know, so just kind of coming to the repo might be a little bit challenging. But what I always encourage folks to do is to try and find a space that you want to work in, and lurk in their meetings, hang out in their meetings, look at the issues, the PRs. The people who are there usually are happy to help and get you kind of onboarded and kind of get you know, spend a little bit of time with you. but I think if you put in the work too, that there are entry points, whether it's like tooling or package maintenance or releases or a variety of areas there. And part of what we talk about in the open source talk is that some of the key tenets are that we try to do everything in the public and on GitHub. So issues, PRs, documentation there. The meetings are open, and the meeting, there are usually issues for each meeting, so you can see the agenda and everything. So I encourage folks to take a look there and poke around, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to get a nudge in any direction.
I think I'd just add to that, like, one of the key things is figuring out what do you want to accomplish, right? Because I think it's very challenging if you're like, I don't know what I want to do. I just want somebody to tell me what I need to do. That's hard. But like you said, if you figure out like, hey, I have an interest in this area, I'd like to improve the diagnostics, or I'd like to help on the releases, that can help you figure out much more easily, like, yeah, where should you go and get involved in the meetings? Who might be, somebody who's doing that work already that can give you a hand. And I think the other thing is, like, I think it requires a bit of a sustained contribution, right? Like, it's very hard to come in and do one or two things, and it's better if you have that longer term plan of like, I want to be involved and help in this area, because then you can kind of build up to that. And I've seen much more success on kind of that front.
Yeah, I agree. I think a drive-by commit might work. You can do that, but really, if it's best if you're able to set aside a little bit of time each week and have some sustained engagement. Yeah,
that's the terminology where it comes, just to add the terminology, and these are terminology that you learn after you start working with an open source project, the upstream versus downstream. And if you talk to like a person out of college, right, that had never done open source, like, what are you talking about, right? What is upstream and what is downstream? It's like first floor and second floor of my house. But the upstream, for people watching, like the upstream, what we mean by that is, like, in this case, Node.js. Like, there's a single repo called Node.js Node. And by the way, I was looking at the stats. 25% of the code there is C++. So if you want to contribute and you're a C++ coder, actually you can help.
Oh, definitely.
But
so a lot of people like I'm a Node.js developer, I'm going to code in there, and they see all these VA C++ code, and they get scary. Like, it's actually, that's the part that is very critical, right? When it comes to Node.js, it's the C++. But I was going to back to the downstream and upstream. Is the part of contribution. So the folks and the names that you see in the open source project, big as Node.js, you will see people from IBM, right, Red Hat, different companies contributing, and we are the downstream. So we are benefiting from that core. So we have a, like Michael says, we have a best interest of being involved, because we're going to build something on top of it. So our interest, or long-term interest, is like, I work for a company, but yes, my company is letting me work on a downstream, or my team is working on the downstream. I'm part of the upstream. So I'm helping, making sure that what we're building on top of it, the upstream, is stable, is secure, and security is one of the biggest assets. And also followed by, you can say, testing and quality. So if testing and quality are not taken care, then you need individuals to do automation, like Beth was saying. We need help around automation. But just for people getting into open source, it's not about, I want to open a GitHub account and I want to work in open source so I can put it in my Twitter, or I put it in my GitHub. It's like, it could be a personal project, or it could be just a learning experience. Have a goal of a certain area that you would like to learn and help out. So that's kind of like why sometimes people that are not related with the downstream kind of have a difficult time, like Michael saying, like, what can I work on today, right? And do one thing and then go away. So that's why it's important to have foundations. We're talking about foundations where companies give money. At the end of the day, they give money because there's servers running, making sure that the test and the quality runs, and also there's individuals behind that. If there's a security breach in the core, all the downstreams are affected. So who's going to fix it and how fast? So that's kind of like the mechanics, and also the the aspects around downstream and upstream.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
I just wanted to say, like, in that downstream upstream, like, I almost see any company who's directly using the community download binaries is a downstream, right? Like they're, you can go through other distributions like Ubuntu and Red Hat both have their Node distributions, which are like a form of downstream. But if you're using the binaries directly, you're basically your own downstream, and your application is running on top of that. And as Carlos says, therefore your company should have a vested interest into helping things moving forward, and you can do that by like giving people time so that they can actually contribute and be Node knowledgeable, so that when you have an issue in production, they can help, or they can help you figure out those observability issues, or you can contribute to a foundation which supports one or more of the projects that you're supporting. But to manage your risk, at least from my perspective, you really should be doing something on that front, because it's open source may be sort of free to consume, but it's not necessarily like cost free in terms of risk and benefit. And that's what a lot of what a business does, is sort of balance that risk and so just to say that they should be, you should be thinking of yourself, even if you're using Node, you're probably some form of downstream, and convincing your organization of that can help in terms of being able to have a longer term participation.
Yeah, convincing your organization is a great kind of, I don't know if it's a segue or just continuation. And Anton, I'll go to you. I now know that you were at NearForm and are at IBM now. And I think, both companies are real supporters of open source. What do you have any suggestions or thoughts about, people who work at companies who consume open source, but don't necessarily set aside time or resources to contribute back? Why should they, and do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think I know off the cuff answer to that, and I think it's quite a substantial challenge that the industry's sort of facing at the moment, right? So sort of historically, we've had folks like Red Hat who have basically mitigated that problem by sitting in front of the open source ecosystem and saying, okay, we'll be the providers. I don't want to call them gatekeepers, quite a negative connotation, but we'll support your interaction with the open source ecosystem. And they've done an absolutely fantastic job of that, okay? And now I think, and there still always will be, and that space is growing and will continue to grow, but we're getting into a new era of organizations where they for certain aspects, they may not want to go through a third-party intermediary like Red Hat. They may want to go and contribute into the ecosystem themselves, right? And I think the challenge for them is there's a business decision around it. It's not just a technology decision. It's a business decision as to how do you mitigate that risk? And we're only just starting to find the answers for that. Certainly by having advocacy, like running sessions like this, and sort of giving pointers to the value of contribution. I think the growth in knowledge that we talk about, and the ability to support directly and then socialize that through organizations, absolutely. But it's not a solved problem yet, Joe, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, definitely not. Beth, I know we talked a little bit about this in our open source talk too, but you have any thoughts about trying to get companies convinced to be more involved in open source?
Yeah, I think it is going back to Michael's comment. It really needs to be framed as you need to do this to manage your risk. You can't just consume all of these open source projects. If you open an issue up on a repository, there's no like service level agreement that says anyone's going to read it, anyone's going to dedicate the time to fix to it. And I really think it goes back to managing expectations as well. Within the Node.js package maintenance working group, we get together a lot of module owners, and one topic that comes up a lot is this management of expectations. Some folks will just create a module, put it up on GitHub in their own time or for personal use, and then all of a sudden it gets mass adoption and people are posting the messages, spamming them, even via other means, not only GitHub, saying, hey, when are you going to provide this fix? So the package maintenance working group is looking at how we can encourage open source dependents to express their intent, in particular via maybe some fields in the package JSON to say, this project's just a hobby project. I will respond to issues within like as soon as possible, or best effort, or perhaps if there was an organization backing that particular module, which in some cases there will, some companies will publish their modules, maybe you could say something like 7 days if it was owned by an organization. But it does go back to managing your risk. So that's how I think, if I was trying to convince my manager to say we need to contribute to open source, it's about managing risk. If there's a bug and I can contribute a fix to it, and even go as far as, in our case, cutting a release, getting a release out, or helping to get that fix out, that puts your company in a much better position than just being at the end of someone else's availability, who you don't have an agreement for. And really, I don't think you can expect a fix unless you're paying someone money. Like,
No, yeah, they're volunteer time, and I've seen quite a few issues like that where it's like help, and then like a week goes by and it's like still help, and it's like, yeah, and that's going to happen because it's a project where there's people who volunteer their time, and we work to sort of ensure the best outcome for everybody. But on any one issue, it doesn't mean just because it's like super important for your company, that doesn't mean that it's actually super important for everybody and is the top priority. And you really do manage your risk by having people who can work on it, get involved, and also just have the contacts with the other people in the project to ask questions and get help more easily, all that kind of stuff, because that's part of contributing, builds up that sort of goodwill as well.
Social aspect of it, I tell it.
Yeah.
And that's also, I think, for people that are looking at starting their careers and they want to put like open source in their resume. I think the benefit, more than just putting open source, is the skills that you learn about social and working with other folks, right? It's like if you're working with that technology, you want to be the best on that technology, to the point that you know where to find the people that build that technology, where the Slack, or back in the days, and then myself, IRC, right, the right channel to go into IRC or Slack or Discord, and to just have a conversation there, like, and you can start that joining that social aspects of like asking questions of like, I'm trying to learn the technology, and then like I'm having a trouble with the technology. And even before opening an issue, right, or opening an issue and then going to the technology and say, hey, folks, I have this problem, who can help me? And if you're a person that you're a new person to the community, then it depends on that, how the community reacts or how important is the issue you found. But if you're already known in that community that you did a PR to fix a markdown issue, you open usually the people that I love to have in my open source community. So when I wake up in the morning and I see Slack or see GitHub issues that answer questions that I couldn't answer, but I was sleeping. I love when other people from around the world say like, yes, you are people don't think they're a contributor by helping others that are getting started, and you are an expert. Like, what folder do I use from the 100 repos that we have, where that thing is, or where's this test located, or somebody else opening an issue last week and they're talking about it over here. You are a contributor just by receiving people and answering questions. And then that's how you become the ladder that we have in open source, a ladder of contributions. You start as a contributor, a committer, and PMCs. Other people, different communities have different levels until you get approver. But then, like Michael Brett was saying, like, then you don't have enough hours in the day. You need to grow and scale. So you need to become a mentor. So that's why Beth was saying shadow programs. So shadow to do a release, because you want to move to do something more interesting, to join another open source program, right? And leave people behind that code and that community is taken care of. So it's a social aspect of it also.
I think I liked what you mentioned about, the skills, because I think the skills you learn in an open source community are really very applicable to, your work with an organization. The thing that struck me, though, is that it actually is like an early opportunity to develop the skills which you're going to need as you become more experienced within your organization. You take on greater responsibility, because in the open source project, you can actually do that maybe sooner than you'll be able to do it within your organization. You might be working within a small group, working on something very tightly focused. When you get to the open source community, it's going to be much more sort of communication across a whole bunch of different groups, different people, different time zones. And those skills are going to be really valuable in your organization. Maybe not immediately, but at some point you'll find out, wow, being good at those things are going to help you move forward a lot more easily than you would have otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's people skills as well as tech skills. Depending on where you work, like you might learn a bunch of stuff in open source, and then you come to your job and you're like, wait, actually, this is the way we do it in open source. This has kind of been established, and this is a good way to go. Anton, it looked like you were going to say something a minute ago. I'll give it to you, or maybe not.
Yeah, no, and just again, like we're very focused on sort of code and contribution to GitHub, but you can't underestimate sort of the just back to the social skills. So the supporting meetups, supporting the face-to-face engagement, writing blog posts on the technology. Sort of, you don't have to necessarily be in GitHub. Sort of broadcasting it to your channels is a massive amount. And I think about sort of the work that folks did when we were kicking off Node. Certainly in Europe, a lot of it was done by word of mouth, and sort of just picking up, like I say, little blog articles, little tweets, and going, oh, actually that's interesting, and learning together. So definitely don't underestimate sort of any contribution that you make. It all adds up in the end, I think. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
That made me think of an angle which I think is quite important as well, is like, often we see people coming to the project and they sort of are, they're hesitant because they don't know whether they've got something to offer, or they're worried like they don't know as much of the people in the project. But what I've seen super, super helpful and really useful is people come and they have an expertise in an area where they're way more of an expert than any of the people already in the project. And they bring that knowledge. And so just because you don't have the knowledge of Node core, Node specifics itself, the knowledge you do have in your domain areas can actually be really helpful to the project. Because, for example, we were talking earlier about, the new cloud native deployment model is like, how do I, deliver my packet, basically a container, right? And the observability side of things, and bringing the knowledge that you might have in some of those areas, which aren't specifically like, how do we get the HTTP server to run, or all those things. You can actually be bringing a lot more knowledge that is really useful to the community in that domain. And so I just wanted to say, like, don't think it's just the stuff that's already being discussed that's important. It's bringing that external knowledge that you already have, and everybody has their certain areas of expertise. So bringing those areas to the project and sharing them is a way you can really contribute. And that's kind of what Anton was like. If you're great on the education side, bridging that gap so that people can know how to consume the APIs, how to use the different features. That's something where, like, we always have complaints that, well, the docs could be better, right? So like, if that's the strength of yours, that's something where you can come in and get involved and help out for sure.
Yeah. And a couple other quick points I'll just add to this, and then we can move on. Is like you said, docs. There are a variety of ways to get involved in open source. So even just reading the docs and finding things that don't seem right, and you figure it out, and you can word it better. You can make a pull request there. I've done that many times. Triaging. We have a role now in the Node.js space about triaging. But even, we're working on the new Node.js website. We can use React and Gatsby people and whatnot there. So there's a variety of ways to get involved. And I'll also just say from experience, it can be a way to get a job too. If you're involved in an open source project and a company's using it and they see you being a strong contributor and working well with others, it sounds silly to say, but I've worked places where we've hired people from open source projects because we saw the skills that they had and wanted to bring them on. So yeah, lots of benefits from being involved in open source. But I want to shift gears. I got some comments from the last time we did this that, like, talking about application architecture and things like that was really awesome. And so I want to kind of switch gears to that. And maybe, Beth, I'll go to you first, thinking about just some of the basics out of the box, some of the cloud native stuff that we've talked about and have workshops on. Maybe you can give us some pointers there, and then we'll kind of just go around the room with, like, suggestions and pointers for building cloud native Node.js applications.
Yeah, I think one of the very much early considerations, any folks trying to build large enterprise cloud apps, is again back to the dependencies you're using. You need to make sure the dependencies you're using are suitable not only for the cloud environment from a technical point of view, also like from the enterprise point of view and from your company's point of view. You need to check like the licenses are there, going back to stability. If you're going to stand up an enterprise app that you expect to be around for a few years, you should really go in and make a judgment call on any of the modules you're using or any of the dependencies to see, is this a healthy community? Will this community still be around for the duration that I need my app to be available? And really, that early on, you need to consider your dependencies, what you're standing, the foundations you're standing your cloud native applications on. And that's one area I'm particularly interested in. It's like, how do you make that call early on? What's a good component to use? What's good to build on top of? That's probably one of the biggest concerns. I know there's been a lot of challenges enterprise companies have seen, and at some points I think it was a barrier to adoption to Node, because Node, with such deep dependency trees, knowing what to stand on top of is much more of a challenge. We've got so much choice available compared to everyone else. So I think that is a challenge. And again, talking it through via the package maintenance working group and things like that, with lots of people sharing similar points of view on that one.
Yep. Carlos, it looks like you had something to say. I'm trying to read the room here.
Yeah, I mean, we can take a whole day. That's some of the things that we do on we call them architecture frameworks or workshops, framing workshops that we call them. And the thing to realize is that there's a lot of architecture running applications in the cloud that are not on the language. So I know we're talking about open Node.js and JavaScript, but to run a cloud native application, there's a lot of architectural decisions that you have to do, and how do you architect the app that compromises all aspects. And in that maybe week or time period that you're architecting an application, the language doesn't come up yet, right? It could be Java, it could be JavaScript, and these days, realize it or not, it's a multi language applications. We have and the teams are multidisciplinary, where we have folks that are writing Python to do data science, and we have folks that are writing Java code because they're doing integration with message queues or something with a backend that maybe supports Whistle or SOAP. And then we have our, we call them the cool kids in the corner doing the website, and they know JavaScript. And by the way, they're also doing Node.js REST APIs and learning about the JavaScript front end, but also the back end. And that's why I call them like the full stack cool kids that can do, they're powerful. They can do actually the website that can deliver, and also can do integration of Node.js applications. So the architecture covers many languages, but for all of them, they have the same architectural decisions of like, what stack or tool are we going to use for logging? So we need to gather logs from Python, Java, C++, and GraphQL, and whatever you're doing. What are we doing for like observability? So tracing. So Michael was mentioning tracing. Are we going to use OpenTelemetry, or we're going to use Jaeger? And maybe you make the choice, and there's an awesome library for Java, and there's no library for Node.js. So which one do you use? So in terms of architecture, then you decide, well, we use two different libraries, but we combine them. So in Node.js, that actually we did the reference architecture where you can take a look, is we were finding those gaps that was not that like simple to select which module or which tool to use for Node.js. So for example, for logging, Pino, how you pronounce it, I fell in love when I saw that library, right? It met the requirements that I needed as a requirement, that I needed to log in JSON, because that's how we're going to collect logs. But when you're troubleshooting something, you cannot use logs. You need what is going on happening at that time. So you need metrics. So what do we use for metrics? So the standard lingo or language is Prometheus. So there's a great library for Prometheus, where you can put inside your Node.js library to emit business metrics. And I think in the last talk I talked about that. Like, it's not about CPU or memory. It's like what's happening inside your Node.js. It's like the event loop. Is it behind? Is it like what? How is the event loop? Is it behind because you have a lot of requests and you cannot handle all of them? Do you have like business metrics of which API service is not working on Saturdays or Friday because it's hot? And then you go into when you find issues. Like when you find an issue, you're calling multiple microservices, tracing. How do I debug networking and things? So things like Jaeger on open tracing that now become open telemetry, that API, that headers are correlated, like Michael was saying, then you choose an open source standard so that you're choosing things that are like standard and that you can adopt. And then you build your architecture decision records for your application. So in that aspect, it's the runtime. I'll let another one of talking about the build process and the developer aspect.
Yeah, Michael, if you want to, go ahead.
I wanted to jump in here a little bit because, like, one of the key things I wanted to mention about the reference architecture we're working on is, like, in my opinion, when you're building something new, there's like a 20% sort of secret sauce that you want to be the most innovative. You probably, maybe you want to look at the latest, greatest. The other 80%, you probably just want to know what works, and you want to say, okay, I want to take the logger or the tracer. Like, I need one, but I as long as it's good and it's proven. So the reference architecture is not about telling people you have to use this in all cases. It's basically saying, let's pull the experience we have across Red Hat and IBM. We have, teams that are deploying at scale, 9, 10 clusters across the world in Kubernetes. What have they learned? We've got people working with our customers. So like, Carlos and Anton working with customers. What are we learning from their deployments? We have people within Red Hat working with customers who are deploying Node in OpenShift. What have we learned from there? And we have people like Beth and myself working in the Node community. So pulling all that together to say, what have we seen work well? So it's, it's not meant to be here's the only way to do it. Here's the best way to do it. This is a way we've seen it done where we've been successful and we think is a solid choice. And answers, hopefully a bunch of those things, like we just need to have it for that 80%. And then I see personally like that 20% where it really matters to your application. That's where you leverage there's 1.6, 1.7 million different modules. Maybe there's the latest, greatest module out there that's going to make your app so much better that, you go and you use that new one. Versus the other areas when, you go back to the things that Beth mentioned, it's actually not necessarily an easy thing to vet, a deep dependency chain, look at all the licenses, there's a cost there. So if you can get some commonality across your organization to say, for the areas where it really doesn't matter, let's just have a common investment and do that once. That's kind of where we're trying to get to. It's a growing process. We still have a lot of work to do. We have some really, interesting conversations because there's lots of different groups coming from different ways, but I'm quite happy that we've come to something that's there that we can share, and, it's out there for people who want to take a look, but it's not like this versus that kind of argument, right? This is more like, hey, we've been successful with this, and if it's useful to you, you can take a look.
Yeah. Definitely take a look, folks. I'm going to switch gears in this maybe switch back in this last couple of minutes, but I'll go to you, Anton, and maybe you can share with me what sort of considerations do you have when you're architecting an application with a client, say something greenfield? What would you talk them through?
Yeah, so look, you really, and back to what Carlos was talking about there, and sort of Michael, it's not so much around the language, but it's around how you're going to solve the problem that's in front of you. Okay, so like, I think when I speak to customers, they get overly involved in things like microservices, sort of what scale of my microservices are going to be. Am I going to use this language, this package, etc., etc. Really, you need to focus on the delivery and the problem that you kind of trying to solve, and let the architecture sort of form around that. Okay, so and really, where I'm seeing people be successful is when they get a good partition or a good good slicing, partitioning between the problem domains of an application. So if you have, I don't know, a sales application with customers and with products, let's say, that you get a good partition that allows you to develop the functionality in the customer side, and it allows you to develop the functionality in the product side. There may be sub-products, there may be related products, etc., etc. But having that sort of like that level of abstraction that sort of works for the problem that you're trying to solve, so you can deploy products without impacting the customer functionality, and you can get sort of acceleration with those sort of considerations. And there's no sort of hard box that you can sort of draw without it. You have to sort of really understand the problem domain, but it's bringing an approach where folks are comfortable with that. Because a lot of people want to put answers up front when they're building. They want all the boxes drawn on all the diagrams up front, and then they run off and sort of build that afterwards. Whereas really, I find software development is more like making a movie than it is an engineering project.
We're making movies.
Yeah.
I like it. Make it the title. Let's make the title. Let's make movies with Node.js.
What about you, Carlos? I know you're working with clients a lot and doing go-to-market stuff. What's your kind of experience in speaking with clients about building Node.js applications?
Like I said, there's having a knowledge in JavaScript. You can build. You can have skills in the front end, and the language you can leverage the back end. So learning the development tools to accelerate your development process, that if you can have a teammate that can handle the DevOps, because it's very important, right? Not letting the developer team only do the things. So splitting the team in their domain so they can focus on what they need to have to do and not burning out the folks. So I don't know if that's an answer in Node.js, but at least it's Node.js is a very good language, and if you're skilled in it, like I think that Node.js or JavaScript is my hammer, so I can solve anything in JavaScript because I'm good at it, right? But it works. It's like I said at the beginning of the talk, it's 12 years of the making, right? So you like it or not, we're becoming the Java of 2000, but that's a good thing, right? We're not Rust, we're not Go, but we can get stuff done, right? And like Michael says, it can be boring, but it works, and it can move businesses, and you can get you jobs, and you can do economy, right? So nothing to be ashamed.
No. Go ahead, Michael.
I'd summarize that as one word, which is productivity, right? I think Anton made the point to me today that, or not today, but a while back, that, Node became so popular because of the delta in the productivity that it could bring to teams. And, I think that's still why it's popular, is that it lets you get things done and done quickly and efficiently, which is important, while giving you good performance as well.
You can do desktop apps, you can do command line, you can do terminal, you can do backend, you can do website, right? What else you can ask?
Yeah.
You can do mobile, actual phone, right?
Yeah. Cool. Well, we are at time. It just flipped over to 2:00 on my watch here. So thank you to everyone here on the panel. Thanks to everyone who came before us. And up next, we have Remco is going to be giving a talk on loopback, which I'm excited about and encourage folks to check out. So yeah, thanks everybody. Talk to you soon.
Talk to everybody later. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, Nick.
Bye.
Bye.